Okay, what I hope to give you now is a bit of an overview of The Handmaid's Tale in the context of the rise of the Christian right in the late 70s and early 1980s. And so, by way of overview, it's important to know some of the terms we're going to be talking about. And these terms include left wing, right wing, the Christian right, the Republican, Democrat, and Liberal. And a lot of the concepts you're going to hear now are quite broad, and you do well to do some wider reading on this. And finally, we'll look at this in terms of the influence on the meaning of The Handmaid's Tale. Now, beginning with this concept of left wing, the characteristics would include this idea of being progressive and challenging traditional values. And what's important in this is the idea that community rights and freedoms are privileged over that of the individual. There is an idea of favouring egalitarian approach to the distribution of wealth, and the left would favour government intervention to ensure these egalitarian distributions of wealth. You would know these as welfare. At the extreme of this, you would see communism. And on the right, we have the privileging of the individual over the group. We see traditional values and support for capitalism and free trade. The right are suspicious of government interventions in economic and political matters. At their extreme, they would see it as an act of tyranny, or in the very least, they would see it as being inefficient and wasteful. At the extreme of the right, we find fascism. Now, this diagram, which I've sourced from the internet, is a little bit biased, but it can be useful for making this distinction between the left and the right in the American context. In the left of the American political sphere, we see the Democrats as their kind of left-wing representative, although they're not left in the sense of being socialist, which you might find in Northern Europe. At the family level, left-wing values would have a nurturing parent working towards building a self-nurturing child, and the fulfilled adult might end up working in fields like teaching or in science or as an architect or in the media. It's a little bit simplistic, but it does give this sense of transition, I guess. The left would vote for any laws that promote fairness and helping those who can't help themselves. They're all about positive role models and champions of the downtrodden. In terms of religion, they're more scientific, and they don't believe in organised religion and are more unconventional in their thinking. Criminals would be seen as social and economic victims, and homeless, downtrodden victims of the system. Equality is, for the left, equality means a level playing field, and freedom is freedom from power abuse and inequality. But equality is more important than freedom for the left. By contrast, in the right, we see the Republican Party in the American scene. And at that family level, we have this strict parent creating a self-reliant child, as opposed to the self-nurturing one that the left favoured. As adults, we see a self-reliant adult who goes into the police, the military, is a stockbroker, goes into sales, or might become a judge. In terms of beliefs, the right are theistic, which means they believe in God. They believe in organised religion and more conventional in their thinking. When it comes to criminals, they see criminals as having made choices that make them criminals, and the homeless have no work ethic or no sense of shame. Equality is opportunity, and freedom is the chance to fail or achieve. And of those two, freedom is much more important than equality. And you can see on the right there the graph for the kinds of how the right support those different issues. And the right would vote for laws that are about upholding order, helping those who help themselves, strong role models, and champions of opportunity. And so in the American scene, this left and right, as I said earlier, is divided between Democrats and Republicans. And again, Democrats are left, but they're not socialist. They support affirmative action, which is this idea of having, at least in government departments, the ethnic and gender populations being representative of the wider world and creating measures to ensure that. And that's to correct some of the social wrongs of the past. They're often pro-choice, which means they support a woman's right to choose when it comes to issues of abortion. They typically oppose the Second Amendment right to bear arms, and they reject school prayer and any measures that give money to religious organisations. And their famous presidents include Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, John F. Kennedy, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. On the right, we have the Republicans, and they believe in small government, lower taxes, a hand up, not a handout. They reject affirmative action. They're typically anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage. They believe that competition will improve the lot of everyone, and they're supporters of this idea of traditional values. They support the right to bear arms in the place of school prayer, and they've depended upon the support of the Bible Belt for their votes, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Their famous presidents include Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Eisenhower, Nixon, Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and his son George W. Bush. Now, over the past 50 years, since 1960, there have been remarkable ideological shifts as both the Democrats and Republicans have gone through periods of acme and decline. In the 1960 and 64 elections, John F. Kennedy won in 60 and Lyndon Johnson in 64. And this period was marked by democratic optimism. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. During this period, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it was the Democrats who pushed America into the Vietnam War. In the 68 election, Richard Nixon came to power, and this period was marked by distrust of government and paranoia, including the Watergate scandal, which I encourage you to go and find out about. The 72 election was won by Richard Nixon, but he had to resign following the Watergate scandal, and Gerald Ford became president. The general population of America became suspicious of government after that. And so in 1976, they voted for Jimmy Carter, and this period was marked by recession and high government spending, as well as political turmoil. Terrorism, international terrorism became more and more of an issue throughout the 70s, and Russia invaded Afghanistan in 1979. Also in 1979, there was the Iranian Revolution. But in 1980, Ronald Reagan came to power, arguably one of America's greatest presidents, and certainly the greatest Republican president of the 20th century. And he led a conservative revolution in the United States. He increased defense spending remarkably, and this period became known as Reaganomics as he went through this, as he introduced this policy of economic rationalism. In the United Kingdom, his counterpart, Margaret Thatcher, came to power at the same time, and they were very like-minded. And so Ronald Reagan was swept to power in large part because of the Christian right. And right now I'd like you to just watch for the next 4.5 minutes this video of a speech of his that has come to be known as his Evil Empire speech. And this speech was given to a group of evangelicals, and it places his values with regard to communism and his disdain, or I would even say hatred, of communism in light of the Christian right values and beliefs.
Association of Evangelicals community from coast to coast in our great land deeply appreciates and values his love for the truth of the Bible and his commitment to its great moral values. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A number of years ago, I heard a young father, a very prominent young man in the entertainment world, addressing a tremendous gathering in California. It was during the time of the Cold War, and communism and our own way of life were very much in people's minds, and he was speaking to that subject. And suddenly, though, I heard him saying, "I love my little girls more than anything," and I said to myself, "Oh no, don't say that." But I had underestimated him. He went on, "I would rather see my little girls die now, still believing in God, than have them grow up under communism and one day die no longer believing in God." There were thousands of young people in that audience. They came to their feet with shouts of joy. They had instantly recognized the profound truth in what he had said with regard to the physical and the soul and what was truly important. Yes, let us pray for the salvation of all of those who live in that totalitarian darkness. Pray they will discover the joy of knowing God. But until they do, let us be aware that while they preach the supremacy of the state, declare its omnipotence over individual man, and predict its eventual domination of all peoples on the earth, they are the focus of evil in the modern world. It was C.S. Lewis who, in his unforgettable Screwtape letters, wrote, "The greatest evil is not done now in those sordid dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint. It is not even done in concentration camps and labor camps. In those we see its final result. But it is conceived and ordered, moved, seconded, carried, and minuted in clear, carpeted, warmed, and well-lighted offices by quiet men with white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to raise their voice." Well, because these quiet men do not raise their voices, because they sometimes speak in soothing tones of brotherhood and peace, because like other dictators before them, they're always making their final territorial demand, some would have us accept them at their word and accommodate ourselves to their aggressive impulses. But if history teaches anything, it teaches that simple-minded appeasement or wishful thinking about our adversaries is folly. It means the betrayal of our past, the squandering of our freedom. So I urge you to speak out against those who would place the United States in a position of military and moral inferiority. You know, I've always believed that old Screwtape reserved his best efforts for those of you in the church. So in your discussions of the nuclear freeze proposals, I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all and label both sides equally at fault, to ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
Now, the Christian right is an informal term to describe a range of politically active evangelical Christian groups in the United States and Canada. In 1979, Jerry Falwell, who you can see in the top left, founds the Moral Majority. Now, vocal opponents of social disintegration, abortion, pornography, evolution in schools, non-abstinent sex education. Later in 2001, George W. Bush wins an election due in large part to the support of Pat Robertson's Christian Coalition, who you can see on the bottom left here. And Pat Robertson in 1988 made a failed bid to get the Republican nomination to run for president. Now, I mentioned earlier this idea of the Bible Belt. Again, it's an informal term for the region of the United States that's dominated by socially conservative evangelical Protestants. And so we can see it in this red area. As you move more towards the west coast of America, you find people being a lot more secular. So in this region of America, you see people voting more based on Christian values than many of the others. Now, where does this place us in terms of The Handmaid's Tale? Well, as a work of speculative fiction, The Handmaid's Tale can be read as an extrapolation of the context in which it was written. And so this context includes the backlash against feminism, the rise of the Christian right in the United States as a political force, and the Iranian Revolution in 1979, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, and also in 1979, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And so what Margaret Atwood has done is that she's imagined a Christian revolution in the US in order to attack fundamentalism. We can see in the novel how she's drawn together what she would have seen on TV, a film of women in Afghanistan and the effects of a theocratic revolution in Iran, to imagine what that might look like in America in light of her fears of the rise of the Christian right and some of the fundamentalist views that came along with it, especially with regard to the backlash against feminism. And so when writing about The Handmaid's Tale, it is important to write about it in terms of its context, but this also dovetails into the genre of the text. Again, it's a work of speculative fiction, and one of the key ideas about speculative fiction is that it's an extrapolation. That is, it takes on elements of the current context and casts it forward to make not necessarily predictions, but often to cast some dire warnings about the future based on current trends.